Welcome back, friends, for another video, A Day in Oxford as a Historian. And today I want to talk a little bit about a topic that is close to mind and close to my heart. How much should a historian's present impact their research? I wake up every day to work on my dissertation and check the news on what is happening back in the United States in global politics. And how can that not impact my research? Rather than searching the historic record for answers for today's problems, the impact of which I speak is more elusive. It's the very subjects which demand our attention, the questions we ponder, and the primary source material which endeavors to be understood. Last week, I wrote a Substack article about Marc Bloch, a famous French social historian whose contribution to the Annals School altered the field of history and the way we envision the past to consider not just the great figures, the monarchs and wartime generals, but those from below. Instead, Bloch, alongside scholars such as Fernand Braudel, considered the philosophy of history, the craft of the historian. Their subjects were taken from below, from the villages and the common folk, in order to better comprehend how history was experienced. Impacted by the tumult of the early 20th century, they focused their attentions on the everyman, making it later possible to focus our attentions as historians on the role and experiences of the dispossessed. So today I'm taking you for a day in Oxford, where I want to share a bit about my approach to history and how my present, along with the influences of the historian's craft, shapes my research. Marc Bloch once wrote that the faculty of understanding the living is, in very truth, the master quality of the historian. And as I write my dissertation, which draws a connection between child labor exploitation in early modern England to the later laws of slavery enacted in colonial Virginia, I'm continuously asking myself who my research is centering. I am not a biographical historian, and this particular research project has taken me further away from my social historical roots. Rather than following individuals throughout their lifetimes, I instead follow the intellectual thread within the legal record of the English Atlantic. This often makes me feel at a distance from the histories which first inspired me to pursue research. Yet, as I witness the laws of the present weaponized to dehumanize and discredit the dignity of asylum seekers and immigrants, as I witness people dispossessed of their land and livelihoods, I'm reminded of a lesson that I learned in college all about the application of custom versus law, but also how the legal structure is only as strong as those who choose to uphold it. Furthermore, the law is a weapon of control as much as it is a shield for protection. It can harm just as much as it can save. It comes down to who is writing it, how it is justified, and then how it is applied. So, sure, my present impacts my research. It's why I study legal history in the first place. I'm currently struggling with the third chapter of my dissertation, focused on the period between 1625 and 1660. Colonial Virginia was a site of serious demographic changes, introducing indentured servants forced into temporary bondage from the British Isles, and African laborers, some enslaved and some kept as indentured servants into adulthood. The laws of the period had yet to define the role of race in determining the status and rights of an individual. And while England's other colony, Barbados, had begun purchasing enslaved black laborers from Dutch traders, few made their way to Virginia. In fact, the black population in Virginia only made up about 2% in 1625 and 8% by 1660. As a result of this legal ambiguity, the treatment of black laborers in the courts was ad hoc. In the case of labor disputes and property disputes, such as the terms of a contract or the right to one's child, the court applied the laws of England much like they did in the cases involving white subjects. In the cases of criminal offenses, however, one's African descent was cited when they were sentenced to a lifetime of servitude. As I write the sections to describe the relationship between the changing demography of the colony and the law, I'm brought back to those first classes which began introducing these questions which now contribute to my research. It all really began with the introduction of partus sequitur ventrum, which was a legal principle which was enacted in 1662 that stated that all children born to an enslaved woman would be enslaved. I had gone to my professor to ask where this law originated and why it was that the English had enacted it, and they didn't really have any particular answers. So I turned to the scholarship. I turned to historians like Jennifer Morgan, Kathleen Brown, and Saidia Hartman in order to identify their answers for why this law was enacted. And this chapter is essentially the foreground of that discussion. This is the period before that 1662 law was enacted, in which case the courts and the legislature continuously began to think about how it was that they were going to regulate labor, And as these scholars have cited, there were taxes on Black women's labor, but not on white women's. And this was enacted in the 1650s. We see court records whereby a Black individual who ran away was treated with far greater punishment than a Dutchman or an Englishman. This chapter is therefore the foreground. It is that initial introduction to the way that the courts and the law were beginning to question how they were going to build a society around this changing demography, how they were going to treat Black laborers versus white laborers, how illegitimate children born out of interracial relationships were to be treated. History is uncomfortable. It shows the ills of human nature, but also how human beings continuously persevere. The very act of making this video and delving into my research makes me uncomfortable, because the histories that I'm writing about are the foundation of the anti-Black rhetoric, which persists today. It's a history we don't like to discuss, but it's partly that lack of honesty and discourse, which is why we face the challenges we do today. All of the inquiries that contribute to this research are building blocks. From the historiographical record, including social historians like Mark Bloch, and later scholars like Saidiya Hartman and Jennifer Morgan, who took the foundation of social historical inquiry to center the experiences of Black women. I would not be able to ask the questions that I do had they not offered that initial thread. We are all part of a web, a historiography which is constantly in the making. But I want to offer an additional thread of inquiry, which is, how do the people we surround ourselves with impact historical research? It isn't just the news or the philosophy of historical inquiry that shapes us. It's also our friends. I'm surrounded by an interdisciplinary community, and that community includes friends like Hannah, whose research centers on medical education and disability, where she looks at how disabled physicians shape the practice of medicine today. From designing stools to be used in surgeries for those who once suffered with polio in the late 19th century, to the way medical training has adapted or failed to adapt for the work of disabled physicians today, Hannah's work is impacted by inquiries of the present made possible by disability studies. Our research is shaped by our present. And while we must ensure that our inquiries are grounded in methods of care and scholarly rigor, maybe it should be. And so that is my day in Oxford as a historian, writing a dissertation and pondering the practice. And I will see you all next time. Thank you so much for watching, friends.